Okay, we are now recording. Good afternoon. My name is Anthony Salazar, and I apologize for the delay. But here we are. We are with the College of the Environment, and this is our quarterly session, a career development session entitled Pathways to a Postdoc. And with us is a great selection of our postdocs in the College of the Environment who will be serving as panelists. And our moderator is Dr. Aaron Wirsing from the School of Environmental and Forest Sciences. So Aaron, take it over.
Okay, I hope everyone can hear me. Thanks, Anthony. Let's go ahead and get started. Welcome everyone to the College of the Environment graduate student session on career development. As you know, our program is called Pathways to a Postdoc, where we are featuring 3 postdocs from the college who will be sharing their stories about their postdoc experiences with you. Thanks so much to everyone for joining us. And yeah, apologies again for the late start, but it's nice to see that we now have a large number of attendees tuning in. For those of you who don't know me, I'm again Aaron Wirsing, Professor of Wildlife Science and the PI of the Predator Ecology Lab in the School of Environmental and Forest Sciences. And apropos to today's topic, after completing my PhD at Simon Fraser University in Vancouver, British Columbia, just up the road, I was a postdoc for 3 years at Florida International University in Miami, Florida, where I examined the indirect effects of tiger sharks on seagrasses in Western Australia and the movements of bull sharks in the Florida coastal Everglades. Today's session is going to be divided into 3 parts with additional time for a brief survey at the end. First, we'll meet our panelists who will each briefly tell their stories to you. The panelists and I are then going to engage in a brief discussion about finding and being a postdoc. And finally, we'll open up the floor for some Q&A with you, the audience. To all of our attendees today, please use the chat button at any time to report technical issues. And of course, hopefully we've gotten all those out of the way. And the Q&A button to send us questions for our postdoc panelists that we'll address a little bit later. Okay, so let's go ahead and meet our 3 panelists today. Dr. Joseph Finlon joins us from Atmospheric Sciences, where he has been a postdoc for over a year. Advised by Professor Lynn McMurdy, Joseph's work is a combination of both field and computational, where he focuses on cloud microphysics and radar observations of winter cyclones. He is in the field 2 months out of the year, and the rest of the time he's processing and analyzing data. Dr. Colleen Hoffman hails from the Cooperative Institute for Climate, Ocean, and Ecosystem Studies, where she has been a postdoc for 3 years. Advised by Professor Randy Bundy, Colleen's work seeks to understand how organic ligands impact the cycling of trace metals in hydrothermal systems. To date, she has been focusing on characterizing and quantifying iron-binding ligands in multiple vent systems along the Atlantic Ocean and in the Caribbean Sea. Dr. Lisanne Petracca is based in the School of Aquatic and Fishery Sciences, where she has been a postdoc for just under a year. Advised by Professor Sarah Converse, Lisanne's computational work in natural resources focuses on carnivore spatial ecology, wildlife conservation and management, and she is specifically developing a population model for gray wolves in Washington State. I'm now going to ask each of our panelists to spend a couple more minutes briefly telling us their stories. For example, their educational backgrounds and more about their postdoc research. Joseph, could you please kick us off?
Sure, thanks for the great introduction. I'm Joseph Finlon. I've, I guess, been interested in meteorology and the atmospheric sciences since I was 4, living in an area that was a Southwest desert. I was still mesmerized by dust storms and such. But as time went on, I got my bachelor's in the Department of Meteorology at SUNY Oswego, where I did some field research regarding lake effect snow in upstate New York. And then I got my bachelor's and my master's and PhD in the Department of Atmospheric Sciences at the University of Illinois. During my time as a grad student, I had the opportunity to participate in multiple field projects, such as Southern Oceans Project that was stationed in Tasmania, Australia. I was also able to take a year internship at the National Center for Atmospheric Research, where I was in charge of installing and collecting data from an instrument at the NCAR field site. And then as my year and change, almost 2 years here as a postdoc at the University of Washington, I am part of a NASA-funded field project based along the East Coast. And we fly 2 different airplanes, one above and one within these nor'easters or Atlantic coast snowstorms, collecting various data ranging from radar to microscale kind of microphysics observations. And a lot of my analysis is tying those 2 different data sets together and trying to improve our measurements from these airborne platforms.
All right, thanks, Joseph. Colleen, we'll move over to you now.
Okay, thank you. So I guess I was more of a late bloomer in figuring out what I wanted to do. I initially thought I was going to go into neuroscience, so you can see I'm far removed from that. But I got my bachelor's in chemistry, and it was in my senior year due to an opportunity that I actually started falling in love with kind of ocean and environmental research. And so I actually worked 2 years after undergrad in that lab as a technician before going to grad school. And then I did grad school at the University of Minnesota, where I got my PhD in neuroscience. And there I specifically went to work with my PhD advisor, who uses synchrotron radiation to understand particles in different types of environments, including hydrothermal vents. And so there I was part of a very global project called GeoTraces, which is trying to understand trace metals in the ocean. And we were part of called the PUMP team on one particular cruise that went out over the southern East Pacific Rise and Southern Pacific Ocean to analyze sort of how hydrothermal particles how far they traveled and extended into the ocean interior. And so that kind of led me to what I'm currently doing here in Seacoast and at UW with my postdoc, and these questions between how organics and inorganics interact together and how they impact sort of bioavailability and cycling of these metals in the ocean.
All right, thanks, Colleen. And over to you, Lisanne.
Sure. Hi, my name is Lisanne Petracca, and yep, I'm currently a postdoc in SAFS. So that's the School of Aquatic and Fishery Sciences, but I do study a terrestrial mammal. So that's interesting. But yeah, so I did my undergrad at Tufts University, and it was your typical liberal arts education. I had 3 majors. So those were psychology, environmental studies, and biomedical engineering. So didn't exactly know what I wanted to do. And it was a study abroad program to Tanzania in my junior year that solidified my desire to study wildlife. And for my master's degree, I went to Duke University, got a master's in environmental management, and got quite good at GIS and the statistical programming language R. And that set me up well for doing my PhD a number of years later. What I do have to say is that I worked for 10 years at the nonprofit Panthera doing big cat conservation. So I've been kind of a big cat researcher for most of my, pardon me, I'm about to sneeze. No, I'm not, okay. For most of my professional life. And so I continued to work for Panthera part-time while I did my PhD, which was at SUNY ESF, where I got my PhD in ecology, studying essentially spatial ecology of lion and jaguar and other big cats at the human-wildlife interface. And yeah, I'm now at UW and I'm working on developing a wolf population model. And that is essentially tying together different streams of data. So we have information on their annual pack counts, so abundance. We have counts on their reproduction, and then we have information on their survival. And it's essentially tying those threads together to help inform the periodic status review of wolves, to help guide their management in the future, because it is a colonizing species. So wolves first appeared in the state about 13 years ago, and they're continuing to expand their range. So it's a matter of how to manage this species where we're seeing more and more of them. And that's all.
Okay. Well, let's keep this moving right along because we started a little bit late. Next up is time for a bit of discussion amongst myself and the panelists. So to that end, I've developed a set of questions. We might not get to them all, but that's okay. I'm hoping that there'll be questions the panelists will be excited to address for us. So I'll dive right in with our first one. Oh, hey, Maureen has joined us. Excellent. Well, Maureen, on that note, let me quickly give you an intro and then have you talk about yourself for a couple of minutes, okay?
Yeah, super sorry. Just all the links and everything, I just couldn't get it to work, and finally it's working. So
we are delighted to have you here. No worries. Yeah, there were some technical hiccups getting this thing going. So pleased to be joined by Dr. Maureen Williams, who is also from the School of Aquatic and Fishery Sciences, where she has been a postdoc for a year. Advised by Professor Chelsea Wood, Maureen's work is focused on determining how humans impact the parasite communities that live within coral reef fishes. She is also involved in projects looking at the metabolic costs of parasites in freshwater fishes, the impact of aquatic invasive species on human parasite transmission, and the ways in which parasites obtain energy from their hosts. Maureen, I'll now have you go on and maybe take another couple of minutes to talk about yourself, your academic background, maybe anything more you want to share with us about your postdoc research.
yeah, I'll try to keep it very brief. So I did my undergrad at the University of Notre Dame. From there, I spent a few years working as a lab manager at an independent research laboratory in Florida, which was a lot of fun. After doing that, I decided I wanted to do a PhD. I really wanted to work on projects that were kind of my own. And I actually got very lucky and got a fellowship to move to Ireland. So I did my PhD abroad, which was a very, very cool experience. I met lots of amazing people and got a lot of really exciting opportunities that were really unparalleled. And from there, I knew that I wanted to stay in research and I wanted to stay in academia specifically. I love teaching, I love interacting with students, and that was kind of the driving force in deciding to do a postdoc. I had spent a lot of time, I applied for a few fellowships without any luck. And then on Twitter saw that my current advisor was looking for a postdoc. I messaged her on Twitter and one thing led to another and I ended up getting the position. In terms of kind of my own path there, I'd say like networking is always key, keeping in touch with people, following them on Twitter. You never know who's going to have a position open up. And checking all the different like lists and job boards helps a ton too. Also keeping things flexible. So from my intro, you might be able to tell I've done a lot of different things and been in a lot of different systems and have a lot of different interests. One of the cool things about doing a postdoc is that you get to kind of set your own agenda and you get to oftentimes follow your interests. So, you know, even if my main project is focused on one thing, it doesn't mean I don't get to continue my other research interests as well. So that's a very brief run through, and sorry, you know, technology is hard. You'd think after 1,000 years I'd be able to Zoom, but apparently not.
All right, thanks so much, Maureen. And again, delighted to have you join us. So we'll leap into the questions now, and your answer actually segues kind of nicely into some of the things that I was going to ask about. And as we sort of discussed as the panel earlier, when I ask these questions, everybody doesn't have to respond, but I encourage up to all of you to respond to each of these questions. And we'll see how many we get to before we go to the Q&A session at the end. So first, from my standpoint, at least, one of the impediments to securing a postdoc is that information about where to find these positions and how to fund them, perhaps more importantly, isn't always widely available or obvious. As I was wrapping up my doctoral work, a funded NSF proposal on which I was working with one of my research collaborators, Mike Heithouse at Florida International University, became the basis for my postdoc. To help the members of our audience demystify the postdoc and perhaps strategize about their next steps, I'm wondering if each of you could talk a little bit about how your postdocs came about. For example, how did you find them and how did you fund them? And Maureen, you've already given us a few of those details.
I can, oh, Colleen, were you about to start? Okay, I'll go and then you
Yeah.
Who's gonna go first? Yeah, so again, I was working in the nonprofit world And I felt that my career had just kind of, I just, in the organization that I was in, it was so small, there was no real upward mobility for me. And I felt that I had more skills that I could learn and broaden the ability to do good conservation science. And so for me, it was all about Twitter. I know Maureen already mentioned Twitter. So I joined Twitter about a year ago. So I was very late to the game, maybe a year and a half, I can't recall. And what an incredible resource if you follow the people you admire. So I've long been a fan of Sarah Converse and Beth Gardner, who are two like rock star quantitative ecologists in wildlife. And, you know, I was just sitting around and I see that they're advertising a postdoc together where they are co-advising someone. And I thought, holy Jesus, this would be just amazing. And it would keep me in the carnivore lane. So again, I was working on, you know, lions and jaguars and big cats, and then, you know, working on wolves, you know, not too far a stretch, and it's domestic, and that could segue to a nice career in domestic conservation. So for me, it was all about Twitter and applying, and I was incredibly lucky to have interviewed and then been offered the position. So every once in a while, I'll get people emailing me opportunities, and I know that there are some postdocs that appear on the Texas A&M job boards and things, but for me, it was all about Twitter.
Yeah, Twitter is definitely a great resource. I guess I'll quickly mention a few other resources and then I'll kind of go into my story of how I found my position. But I know the Earth Science Jobs Network is a great resource for postdocs. There is also a list that goes around by the Earth Science Women's Network of postdocs, tenure track faculty jobs. And I'm happy to like blast that out to Anthony after this and so that people can have access to that resource. And it's not everything, but it is kind of that. And then the other advice that's sort of already been mentioned is just networking. That was advice that I was given early in my undergraduate career, to network with people that I admired and basically go up to them at conferences or cold email them and say, hey, I'm interested in potentially working with you. Can we make this happen? Is there funding sources that we can apply to? But for me personally, when I found this position, as I was finishing up my PhD, I was very overwhelmed. And so, and I wasn't really sure what direction I wanted to go, but I was not completely sold on staying in academia. And so, and I knew out here being, doing hydrothermal event research, there's the No Events group at PMEL. And so I literally Google searched one night how to get a job at PMEL. And happened upon what was formerly known as JASEO, the JASEO Postdoc Fellowship. And I had already been previously in touch with Randy Bundy in the School of Oceanography. And we weren't really sure how to make it happen. And so literally I emailed her and was like, hey, I just found this opportunity. Can we make this happen? Is this possible? And she also brought in Joseph Wirsing, who's at NOAA PMEL and Seacoast, to co-advise me as well. And so between the two of them, we wrote a really fast-paced fellowship for this opportunity, and that funded my first 2 years here at UW. And then this last year has been piecemeal, and we've been applying for funding to extend it beyond that, because I'm set to go on a research cruise in the fall, which doesn't leave me much time if my postdoc ends to actually analyze the data. So, yeah.
I guess I'll hop in quick. I would echo what the others have said about resources such as Twitter, and I know in the atmospheric sciences, there's if you're part of a membership or an organization such as the AMS, sometimes you see job postings, drop in your inbox. I was fortunate with my particular situation that my PhD committee received an email from my current mentor, looking if there's any good fits in my alma mater's department for a research project that she just got funded for. So I would say, everyone's pathway could be different, but also your current advisors in your, in the PhD program or even master's program, if you're earlier stage, they might catch wind from, other sources for postdoc opportunities. So definitely social media is very helpful. That's a nice informal additional way that, PIs can send out announcements, but also just through email from your PhD committee. So.
Yeah, just a few other things that I think is helpful, and a lot of this applies to kind of like any job you're looking for. One of the best things that worked very well for me when I was looking for post PhD jobs. Tell everyone you know that you're looking for a job, like literally everyone you know, just tell people you're looking, because oftentimes people just don't put two and two together. One of the coolest things that I actually ended up getting an offer somewhere from was at the end of conference talks in like the last 2 years of my PhD. I always had a slide that was like, also, I'm going to be looking for a job. Here's what I'm available. Here's what I'm into. And it's a little bit cheesy and a little bit difficult to maybe get the courage to do. But I had someone approach me and be like, absolutely, I have some ideas. Here's where we can go. Right after a talk, like a PI approached me, which was super cool and awesome. So don't hesitate to kind of sell yourself. And, if you're having, I don't know, I have a hard time sometimes getting the courage to do these things. There's always someone out there doing it, so it might as well be you. That's the way that I look at it. Like someone else, if you're not, if you're not the person to put yourself out there, someone else will. So try to get a little bit of solace and a little bit of courage. Cold emails also can work really well if there's someone you really admire. You can always just send them an email and say, hey, I'm interested in your stuff. I think you're really cool. People at worst will be flattered and at best might have some opportunities. And I'm going to just drop into the chat a few of the other lists that I use as fisheries, marine biology, ecology sort of stuff. So you'll have access to those, hopefully. People are really friendly and really willing to help. So, if you're able to put yourself out there, it can go a long way.
All right, that was fantastic. Yeah, and thanks for dropping those resources into the chat. Yeah, before we move on, I'm hearing a lot of emphasis on networking, particularly networking through social media. And just one additional thing I might add, and again, I don't want to distract graduate students from their theses and dissertations, but I remember that when you are a grad student, there will periodically be opportunities for side projects, side collaborations, and those can be great ways to build out your network too. That can sort of open up new and different pathways that might ultimately lead to a postdoc. So sort of diversifying your research portfolio as a means of networking. I remember as I approached the prospect of pursuing a postdoc, thinking about the extent to which my current graduate research might inform my postdoctoral research direction. Ultimately, my postdoc research program was both an extension of my graduate work, but also an opportunity to explore new realms. Could some or all of you please speak a little bit about how your postdoc research relates, if at all, to what you did as a grad student? And along those lines, I'm wondering if you might please share your thoughts on the advantages of continuing expanding versus deviating from one's graduate research as a postdoc.
I'm going to jump in again. Yeah, so for me, it was definitely an extension. Not everything that I'm doing now, I knew how to do when I got my postdoc. So I am by nature, so by training, I should say, a spatial ecologist. And I saw a lot of postdocs that were, large scale spatial modeling of species X, species Y. And it's like, I already know exactly how to do that. Like I would be good at that postdoc. But I already know how to do it. And how cool would it be to do a postdoc that does have a bit of what I know how to do, but also just have an avenue for exploration and learning new things. So for me, the postdoc with Beth and Sarah was like, yeah, there's going to be some spatial stuff in here, but also some hardcore population modeling, like an integrated population model that has never been done before. And it doesn't matter what an integrated population model is, just that it's this novel population work that hasn't been done. And I was like, Yeah, okay. I definitely don't know how to do that, but I'm with the people, with the right people who can give me the structure to be able to learn those things. So I can bring my skill set in GIS and spatial stuff, and I know how to do all of that, but then they can help me learn the things that I don't. And so I would be leaving that postdoc with strengthened skills in what I already knew, but also having this entire new universe of skills and knowledge. So yeah, in my case, it was a bit of both.
Yeah, mine was definitely more of an extension. I'm still working in the same field that I did in my PhD. Once this cruise happens, technically the same field site. But I have expanded the field sites that I've worked at, and I've looked at it more as a global. So I feel like I was trained in my PhD as a low temperature geochemist. So we thought very, very small. And I still as trained as a chemist, I still care about those really small interactions that influence sort of the bigger picture. But I think in my PhD, I've learned to think more globally and oceanographically, as well as the way I approach the questions has changed completely. So the way I'm asking the questions, and whereas in my PhD, I was much more interested in the inorganic components, now I'm interested in the organic. And it may seem like small, but the methods that you use to analyze all this stuff has all been new, and I've had to become proficient in. I was never really good at coding, and I'm getting better at it. So these are all kind of things that I've been expanding within my postdoc.
Yeah, I think for me, it was also an extension with the project I'm on now. I will say I've expanded a bit more on the radar meteorology side of things, which is cool because, you know, I'm thinking bigger, broader impacts related, since it's a NASA-funded project, to not only airborne radars, which look down below, but also how it can be, you know, the techniques we develop can be applied to spaceborne radars, which can cover much more area. And be operating 24/7. So there's a lot, you know, of work to be done there to improve those measurements. And it's linking what we gather from these field projects to apply it more broadly to a model or to these spaceborne measurements, which is really, you know, challenging but exciting to work on. So.
Yeah, my postdoc is really different. So the main project that I was hired on is very like community ecology focused, a lot of like interaction stuff. And my PhD was really focused on like behavioral work and ecosystem stability, those are all very different things. But it's really cool because it's allowed me to link a lot of things that I don't think I would have otherwise. I've like definitely gained skills, learned new stuff, like all sorts of things. But the great part, like I think I mentioned previously, was there's still a ton of room for side projects. So I'm still continuing some of the stuff I did in my PhD, just on the side with other people. And that's been really great as well, because all the side projects I've been able to get involved in have, one, built my network, two, allowed me to gain a ton of new skills and learn so many new fields that I wouldn't have necessarily. And it's really allowed me to decide kind of what I want my future research program to look like. So like, what questions do I really want to answer in the future? How do I want to get there? What people can I have help me get there? And I think that's one of the great things about a postdoc. I have friends who definitely have kind of continued on from their PhD work in their postdocs. I have friends I have one friend who did his PhD on birds and then switched to bats and then switched to insects and is now working on bees within the span of 2 years. So there's a lot of flexibility in a lot of positions, and some of that will obviously depend on who your mentor is. So I think, you know, kind of with anything, pick a mentor you get along with who will allow you to build the postdoc that you want. You might want to really focus in on the questions that you answered during your PhD, and that's super cool too. I think, yeah, one of the cool things about being a postdoc is that there's an infinite number of ways to make it work, and it's really cool to see how all sorts of people do it.
All right, thanks for those great answers. Maybe I'll try to do one more because we started a little bit late before shifting over to Q&A, and then I'll save a few in reserve at that stage. So last question for this round is, and this is really especially for the audience, what can a graduate student do? Do you have any tips for what a graduate student can do to maximize their chances of success once they become a postdoc?
I would say, I'll just start out. I guess, you know, there's the whole research aspect of being a postdoc, which is great. But one aspect that I've really loved as a postdoc is, you know, I think a lot of us probably have expanded our roles of mentorship, you know, mentoring undergrads, and even to some degree, maybe some grad students. And I think that's really rewarding. And it also is a nice kind of change of pace in your day to, it also helps your teaching skills if that's something you're interested in becoming down the road, you know, being able to mentor or teach younger students. And, so I really love that. And I think that's one way in which you can really, expand upon your, make your postdoc even more successful rather than just, a lot of us just, we sit at a desk many hours a day. Mentoring is another way in which you could do something a little bit different and still be engaged in the community. So.
One of the greatest things, so before I started my PhD, one of my friends gave me a book called A PhD is Not Enough. It's a guide to success in academia. And in that book, he gives the advice that there are two things you need to do during a postdoc. One is accomplish something. You just have to finish something. It doesn't have to be everything. You have to finish one thing. And that two, you need to broaden your network. And I would say that those are having, gotten through my first postdoc. Those are the two things that I think have really been crucial. So I would just really pass that advice on. Just work to accomplish something and work to build your network and make yourself known. And everything kind of flows from those two things.
Yeah, I guess kind of thinking about like when you first start, just, ease into it. Like coming out of a PhD is very, you accomplish a lot. And I personally started 2 weeks after defending, so that was also a rush. For this postdoc. But yeah, know that it's going to take a few months to adjust. I've heard everyone adjusting as quickly in 3 months to taking about a year, which is a little hard in a postdoc given the short time frame. But I think also prioritizing your mental and physical health is really important, especially if you have let it go like I did in my PhD. So I think that's probably one of the big pieces of advice that I have.
Yeah, my comment would be similar to Colleen's, just be mindful of your health, physical and mental. It's so easy. So like at UW, like I, so desperately want to succeed that I find myself overworking and getting weird body aches from physically sitting for too long. And ultimately when it comes to like productivity, there comes a point where you're not working as effectively if you're just overworking. So just work will always be there. There will never not be work. So just take care of yourself and yeah, be mindful of your health and take care of yourself.
All right, thanks everyone for those. At this stage, given the time, if there are any questions from the audience, it's time to address them. Although again, I have many more things in the reserve. We can go that direction as well. So Anthony, Michelle, and Jane, do we have any questions from the attendees that we can have the panelists address?
No questions so far. So participants, feel free to drop in your questions in the Q&A button.
Okay, well, no worries. While we wait for participant questions, I've got another one, and it focuses a bit more on the postdoc experience. Some of you have touched on this a little bit, but I'd like to return to it. And that is, I'm wondering if each of you, or at least some of you, might comment on what you enjoy most about being a postdoc and what you find most challenging.
Sure, I can start us off. For me, what was it the most rewarding? Was that the first one, the most challenging? Okay. So the most rewarding part is getting to work again with Sarah Converse and Beth Gardner, two incredible women who are just excellent mentors, excellent scientists, excellent all-around people. It has been just, having had a rocky relationship with my previous supervisor at the nonprofit, it's so wonderful to have like a healthy mentor-mentee relationship and to feel valued and appreciated and to be doing good work. So that's the number one for me. The most challenging, I don't know, starting a postdoc during COVID. So I'm still in Syracuse, New York. I never made it to Seattle, and there's a whole lot of challenges that come along with that. So I'm essentially, analyzing data for a species that, I'm not currently in, and I'm interacting with state biologists, from afar. And it's hard to get a sense of the local picture when you're so like physically distant. And getting to know the lab. Luckily, we have a lab Slack and we have like meetings every week. And so I do feel connected, but it is hard to be remote and to feel 100% engaged when you're working from so far away.
Yeah, I'll just add on to that. That was a great answer. I think for me as well, I think collaborating with other research groups within my department has been phenomenal. It gives me a whole nother perspective. Even if it's not my area of expertise, I'm able to still contribute something to the group. And it's been good, especially during all this remote stuff, to still keep in touch with these different research groups via Zoom. And then hopefully, when this is all over, we can resume these in-group meetings that are every week. But I think just collaborating outside just your core area of research is another way to get back to building that network and, just kind of expanding your skill set even further, even if it's not your an area you're super, super comfortable with. It's still great to kind of explore these other avenues. So.
Yeah, I guess, I kind of echo both Joseph and Lisanne comments in terms of, just expanding the people that I work with, the conversations that I have, what I get to do, and the fact that I still get to do and work at the bottom of the ocean has been pretty exciting. And one of the, there's only like a small group of people that do this type of research. And so it's really kind of cool to be part of that network. In terms of challenging, I think the problem that I've had is I overcommit to a lot of things. And so actually learning my boundaries has been a huge thing in my postdoc, and learning how to say no has become a challenge, because there was a point, I think about a year in, where due to having to be flexible, because the research cruise that I mentioned earlier was delayed, like we had to like try to scrap what I was going to do, and ask for collaborators' helps. And so all of a sudden I committed to way too many projects. So I had to quickly fish through and figure out how to balance all that with what I had overcommitted to. So I think that, at least personally for me, some of that, just the flexibility of it's great, but it also, it's really fast and easy to overcommit to a lot of things. So knowing your boundaries and what you can actually function as is really important.
I'm conscious of the time, so I'm just going to say people are great. Imposter syndrome is the worst. And that's my experience.
Okay, well, the good news is we do have a bunch of audience questions that have come in, so I'll jump right into those. The first one that came in was, I'm totally overwhelmed with postdoc job ads. How did you sell yourself as someone who can easily pick up new skills?
Give an example of a time when you picked up a new skill. If you can go through and kind of identify when you've been able to do that for yourself. So like, I think a lot of us have taught ourselves an infinite number of things in R, or like, oftentimes you have to like come up with a solution on the fly. Any of those like concrete examples of where you've done it before can really, it just shows to someone that you're capable of doing it, and you can say that you've done it. And I have zero doubts that there is an example for every single person where you've had to pick something up on the fly and you've done it.
Yeah, and I'll just also add on, like, you already have a network of people from conferences and things that you've been to, and I would say lean on that network, and they know kind of the skills, and you can also reach out to those people, like we said, through cold emails, or I guess it wouldn't be cold if you know them, but but that also is sort of a way to kind of get around the job ads, because you don't need to wait until there's an ad. You can make something happen, and that may help. That was, like, for me personally, the better way to go than waiting for job ads.
Okay, maybe I'll jump to the next one. We've got several questions here. This is another good one. When looking for postdoc opportunities or just starting, how do you ensure you're setting yourself up to accomplish something before your position ends?
So I had a long talk with Chelsea before I came, and like we looked at all the different questions that we wanted to address and which seemed most reasonable and which were most correlated to my interests. And even then, the first project I started completely failed and we had to pivot. So I think just keeping things open with your mentor can really help. A little bit of introspection can be really useful here as well. So kind of noting what you're most passionate about and like what about the project is the most interesting can really help you identify the thing that you can most quickly make an impact on. It's tricky and it's really specific to who you are, but I think a little bit of planning ahead and even taking the first few months of your postdoc to really nail down where you're going and how you're going to get there can really, really help.
Also, I need to add that sometimes your like perfectly set timelines and your deliverables for each of those little quarters can completely fall apart. So with this wolf stuff, the project just got bigger and bigger and bigger. And this model is just this beautiful, wild animal that I can barely control right now. And so this was originally a 12-month postdoc. It's now through October but I still have a couple deadlines that I'm looking at. And I'm like, honestly, given the state of this model, I don't know how we're going to make it, but we're going to freaking try. So know that like you can be so organized and so good with deadlines, but if you don't really know where the project is going till you're in the thick of it, things can change as well. So don't put too much pressure on yourself for these arbitrarily set deadlines if they're not feasible.
Yeah, and I'll just kind of quick.
Oh, go ahead.
Yeah, I was just going to say, you can also do something called an individual development plan with your advisors. And that's something that's more laid out sort of along the lines of what Maureen was talking about. And that's sort of an agreement between you and your advisors of what each of your roles are within this project. And that will help a lot, kind of maybe guide some ambiguity that you maybe have had with your PhD or other kind of projects.
Yeah, and then I'll just add, at least for me, this might not be everyone's case, but it's, for me at least, easy to get sucked into these other projects, whether it's your own side projects, not focused on your core work, or it's collaborations with other people. And I think it's just important to always keep in mind, also keep, working at your core research interests and goals, so that you make sure you could kind of get to that, a good accomplishment, get, paper out, finish, what you set out to do in the amount of time that you're expected to be in your postdoc position. So I think just keeping that main goal in the forefront is important. So easier said than done.
Okay, time for a couple of more here. Here's another one. Should I be focusing on getting a competitive postdoc fellowship with funding that is my own and thus have flexibility on who I work with? Or should I be focusing on signing on to an existing project as a postdoc? What are your opinions? Is there one that is advantageous?
Yeah, so as I mentioned, for my first 2 years, I was in technically a postdoc fellowship with Seacoast. And I don't, in that case, the Seacoast postdoc is very, very flexible. And you can go anywhere you want kind of with it once you have it. But I don't think it necessarily matters. I think it's probably your preference. I would say if you reach out to someone who is like you would really like to work with, but they don't have funding, then I'd say go the fellowship route. If they potentially have funding for you, then you can say, okay, maybe I'll take this funding and then I'll apply for my own funding, for a couple years down the road or something. So I think there are multiple ways to kind of paint this picture. It's not a either or. I think it really depends on the conversations that you have with the individuals that you would like to actually work with.
Yeah, I'll quickly add on to that. I think that was really well answered. My route was more, I was brought into an already funded project. And what's been nice for me, at least, is it's given me the time to just focus on, publishing, working on those, the core questions I'm setting out to answer. And as Colleen mentioned, that can set you up even if you want to, pivot or do stuff a little bit different, maybe write a fellowship proposal or something like that. A year or two down the road. So it's not like you have to pick one or the other, but there are advantages either way. But for me, at least, it's been nice to focus on those research goals I set out to do, and then down the road a little bit, I can maybe see about obtaining my own funding for certain projects. So.
I had applied to independent fellowships as well as a few advertised postdocs, and I think it was just luck of the draw of what came through. And I don't think one is necessarily better than the other. I think it's definitely down to what you're looking for and what's going to help you get to your next goal. It's hard to get competitive funding, but also you can do it, and it's great if you haven't, and looks awesome on your CV. So go for it, and if it works out, that's awesome, and if it doesn't work out, that's okay too. Life is complicated. Rejection is very common in science. It hasn't, I don't think it's the fact that I didn't obtain this funding, I don't think that's hindered me in my job search at all. So I'll be starting as a professor at a small liberal arts college in the fall, and I don't think the source of my funding was really an issue in any way. So whatever works for you is great.
I've got another good one here, unless somebody wanted to go on that last one. I think we got everybody covered. Since we're running low on time here, I want to get as many of these in as I can. So another question, thank you all for sharing. I'm curious if it was an easy choice for you to decide on continuing with pursuing a postdoc, or did you debate against maybe moving away from academia and choosing a different career path?
So that's a funny one because, I guess it's assumed that if you have a postdoc, then, oh, you've chosen academia, and I definitely haven't yet. So again, I started off, I had 10 years in the nonprofit world, and I'm kind of dipping my toes in academia right now. And I don't know if I'm going to stay. I think that you can do a postdoc and still have avenues to work in the nonprofit sector, to be more of a teaching professor or research-oriented professor, or get a federal job or work for a state agency. In my case, I think that what this postdoc is doing is getting me really great skills, the ability to publish some cool stuff. And, I hate that phrase, like, improve the CV, but I think this is just like a cool few-year stint to diversify yourself and your skills. And really the path is anywhere for me anyway.
Yeah, I echo that. Like I said, I came in not really knowing if academia was really for me. Kind of figured that out in grad school, wasn't really sure where I wanted to go next. So this just seemed like an awesome opportunity, and I got to still do the research that I really enjoyed. And since now being in my third year, like it's starting to solidify a little bit. Like I'm currently applying for jobs like at the national academies and in the policy world, as well as full on like research institutions or national labs, as well as keeping kind of just a pulse on what's going on in academia if a job comes up. So I guess I'm all over the map, which doesn't help anything, but you definitely don't have to. I know there's a lot of pressure to feel like you have it figured out by the time you end your PhD, but you definitely don't. And I think the avenues, even after a postdoc, if you say leave academia, there are avenues that you can come back in. It may be a little bit tougher, but I think that barrier is sort of becoming more blurred.
Yeah, I think COVID really threw a wrench in everyone's plans, and I think I did a lot of kind of career decision making that I hadn't maybe had time to previously, where I was, maybe academia is not for me. If not, what are the things I value most? And I kind of came to the point that teaching was the thing that like had to be in part of my wheelhouse. And so my if I didn't get a job, plans always included teaching. So it's like, I think it's really common to not 100% know what you're interested in or going to do. That's like really, really standard. And I think, yeah, some of the beauty of being a postdoc is that you do have the flexibility to do some discernment, to kind of build those bridges and to look elsewhere. And it's totally okay. Mentors will support it. Hopefully a good mentor should support you in that. And yeah, I think having done a postdoc, when I was looking, at teaching positions as well as at like more traditional academia positions, all of the teaching positions were super stoked that I had done a postdoc. They all thought it was really cool. So it's probably not going to hurt you, and it's okay if you don't know at the start.
You're muted, Aaron.
There we go. Thank you. Okay, I just wanted to direct everybody in the audience's attention to the fact that there's a survey that's been posted in the chat. And if everybody who's still with us could please fill that out, that would be great. And while we do that, for just another minute or two, we had another question that Maureen that answered in writing, but wanted to answer for everybody. So Maureen, maybe I'll tap you now to quickly answer that question while everybody fills out the survey, and then we can wrap this up. And to remind everybody, the question was, how did you expand your network in COVID? Cold emails, did that work?
Yeah, I thought it might be nice to get the other panelists' opinions as well, because my opinion is just my opinion. But yeah, cold emails, that can work. Twitter, again, I know it's like super annoying that we keep saying it, but it's a little bit less formal, and I think sometimes people are more likely to reply, as well as you can retweet someone's paper and say like, this is so cool, I really like what you did. And again, people are just really drawn to positive energy, so the more of that you put out in the world, the better it goes. Some of the online conferences have been really helpful, so some of the smaller ones especially, I think, have done a really good job of moving to online and still maintaining some networking opportunities. And a lot of the different societies have been really good at hosting events designed for networking. So I know because I did my PhD abroad, I'm really involved in the British Ecological Society, and they've had a ton of like mixers, like some of which for like, marginalized groups, which has been really great, like getting to meet like other LGBT people who are working in ecology and are also all stuck at home because of COVID. It's been really helpful to like still have those network roads available. But I think that's very much my perspective, and I'm sure everyone else has different ideas.
I think you answered that perfectly, and I'll just add on, like, at least in my field, a lot of these online conferences are either now free or really, reduced, so that you may ask your advisor, your grad student advisor, hey, it's $40. Do you mind covering this under your grant? Usually they don't mind. And that's a good opportunity to listen in to, and network during opportunities you may not have had the funding or opportunities to. And the cold email thing, I think during COVID, it could especially work. Everyone's been, we've all been through this. We all understand that it's not easy it's not the same as sitting in a poster hall and talking about research with someone, striking up a conversation more naturally that way. So it may feel awkward, but I think, everyone would understand these cold emails, and just trying to put yourself out there a little bit more than what you may normally be comfortable with given the circumstances right now. So if you're kind of near that home stretch of PhD, I think that could be a useful way to go about, and kind of exploring your options and looking at opportunities that way.
And just with the cold email thing, academics, especially like well-known professors, get so many emails, they just cannot keep up. So if someone fails to respond the first time, follow up, because in my case, I can't recall everyone who's just emailed me once, but I remember the ones who've emailed me twice and beyond. So definitely be mindful of the amount of emails that these people get, and maybe just follow up politely if you don't get a response. After maybe 3, I give up. I've had to give up on plenty of people, but yeah, you will get a response from some people sometimes, and that's when it's cool.
Yeah, and I think Maureen mentioned it, but like, yeah, Twitter is another great resource that I've found. I actually got like an opportunity to give a seminar through Twitter. Those are kind of, I guess that's the other kind of way that I've been networking during COVID. Hopefully we'll be able to go back to in person soon.
Okay, marvelous. Well, even factoring in the delay, I think we're out of time now. So alas, that's all we have for everybody. I'd like to sort of wrap this up by paying special thanks to our 4 panelists for so generously sharing their time and insight with us today. I want to thank Anthony, Jane, and Michelle for setting things up and keeping the session moving. And I want to thank all our audience members for being so engaging and sending in those great questions. We really appreciate that. All right, everybody, take care.
Thank you very much, everyone.